Okay, so so on today's podcast, I'm here with Richie Cartwright. Richie studied economics at Jesus College, Cambridge. After which he founded a company called FlowX, which he successfully sold for an unspecified amount of British pounds. He's now the founder of Fella, which is a CBT-based app and online community for men with eating disorders, which is aiming to reduce the stigma for men around mental health. Richie, welcome to the podcast.
Zach, thank you very much for having me, man. It's great to be here.
So, we were at Jesus College at the same time by, happy coincidence. And when you graduated, it seemed like, you had an idea about what the next part of your life was going to be like, and it didn't turn out that way. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what you thought, what your aspirations were when you were leaving Cambridge.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I actually had originally planned to do a master's in China, but I guess during this period, I was a little bit unsure what was the next step in my life. And actually, whilst graduating, I almost kind of accidentally set up a company in the transport space based on some of the data science kind of self training that I'd been doing myself, and that kind of escalated quite a lot. And so, in the end, didn't I did go to China, but only for 2 months, and then I dropped out of that to start the company FlowX, which was basically using existing CCTV cameras, using AI on those to gather better transport data. So working with the UK government on that.
Okay, and after FlowX, that was a kind of decision point for you. There's lots of things that you could have taken your life, in a different direction. But what was kind of behind setting up Fella?
Yeah, so quite a winding path, and I guess they always say during your first company you'll kind of get the idea for your next company, and I always thought that would be something in AI or data networking, never actually the stress that was caused during that to then spur on the helping other men tackling binge eating, which kind of really kicked on around my 24th birthday. So I'm about 26 now, around my 24th birthday 2 years ago, and that was kind of midway through the FlowX journey. So yeah, quite a winding path actually.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell us a bit more about kind of what was happening in your life then?
Yeah, absolutely. So graduated around my 23rd birthday, then um, basically a year into FlowX, didn't know what I was doing, and thought FlowX was failing, and therefore thought I was a failure because of that. Didn't know what I was doing in my life, and I guess from the outside, it probably looked like everything was going maybe quite well, or I had my shit together, or I was on the right path. But internally, there were a lot of unanswered questions, and I had never really recognized that I had emotions. In fact, I used to say like emotions, no, that's not something I have. So I was really, really very much out of touch with actually what was going on beneath the surface. And that's really when I started to use food in quite a more extreme way than I had before. I guess it's interesting because, Zach, we lived together at Jesus. And so actually, if you look carefully, maybe there were some times that were, you could see some of the distorted eating behaviors there, but it really did kick on around my 24th birthday. So after university.
Well, it's funny that you say that, Richie, because now that I kind of know your story, I did actually like think back, like did I notice anything, to do with that? And the honest answer is I didn't. And I was kind of, you're in the year below me, kind of, blues and kind of, always in the gym and kind of, part of that kind of group of men that I kind of think are, held up a little bit and, kind of esteem the kind of, guys that people want to be like at university. I definitely didn't get the sense that that there was something, going on underneath the surface. I wonder, is that something anyone's kind of said to you before, or, what do you think of
Well,
that?
I mean, 100% because I guess I didn't even know that there was a thing called binge eating that was an external thing as opposed to just me needing more self control or me needing to kind of crack down. And there were kind of zero people that knew in the world, including myself, and never mind anyone external. So no, I hid it really very well, and I think because I had no external signs with the changes of weight, because of all the compensation that I did, then that was quite an interesting thing. And I guess there were some signs, but probably I wasn't aware that they were potential uh, warning signs. So, for example, I'm in no way proud of this, but it's good to kind of admit to it. Really, this I always really struggled to not steal food from housemates, both in first year and also in the house we lived in. And I know there were a couple of times, like looking back, I think it was probably with another of other housemates, but it almost became a bit of a joke within our house, right? But actually, what I've learned since starting Fella is that's a surprisingly common trait, um, where obviously your impulses kind of get over you for multiple different reasons. So at the time, I really wasn't aware that that was a sign of anything more. But it's interesting to look back on that, I guess.
I'm just interested to ask, if anyone's listening to this and they're kind of wondering, I think I might have, a binge eating disorder,
Mm.
and I'm wondering if I'm reaching the point where I'm starting to need help from somebody else. How did you recognize that point for yourself?
Yeah. The shocking thing is, it took me 5 years to get to the point where I Googled anything, which I think tells us a lot about two things: our recognition of this as a condition for anyone, and then the second thing, as blokes, recognition of mental health and mental well-being in general. And so the first thing I'd say is there is good NHS and other healthcare system resources out there, whichever country you're in. And so doing a quick Google to see if some of the stuff resonates. I think the most scary thing as a guy, and especially as a healthy young guy, is like seeing the word eating disorder when you type in your signs or symptoms. And it's both scary, but also it says, well, that can't be me, because eating disorders are young teenage girls who are skinny. That's your immediate association. And so the probably the most important thing to say is, doing a little bit of research, but saying, it's not something that you have to be super scared about. It's not saying you're mentally ill. It's saying, there is this recognized phenomenon that you could probably get outside help with, and that would help you become more of who you want to be. And I think that like not making it too big a deal is quite an important thing that we try to do with a lot of the guys we work with.
That's definitely my impression of kind of eating disorders as well. Like having done a medical degree at Cambridge,
Mm.
and before I was kind of researching for this conversation, I went back to some of the data and found that this is actually like a really common problem. And
Yeah.
there's 850,000 men in the UK, have some form of eating disorder, whether that's bulimia or anorexia or binge eating disorder. So, this is not something which is just affecting a very niche, sort of, person. This is actually like normal people as well. So I kind of totally agree with you that legitimizing and kind of not making it sound like a big deal, because actually this is something
Mhm.
that ordinary people are experiencing. So I was
And
wondering,
I think on that, I guess on that point, Zach, as well, is to say that because it's quite recent as a clinical diagnostic. So I think 2013 it was introduced in DSM, the diagnostic manual. So it's quite recent, and because as a society we've often seen uh, being overweight is quite shameful. Therefore, there isn't this clear separation. If someone is super skinny, they're as in suffers from anorexia, or if someone is purging via vomiting, these are two very clear signs that they have um, a condition that needs mental support. Whereas I think the thing with binge eating disorders, a lot of people struggle sometimes with emotional eating, compulsive eating, overeating, and therefore the lines get really quite blurred. And actually, what we find with the work we do is a lot of the guys we work with are subclinical, but it's a huge thing in their life. So they would not actually be classified as having binge eating disorder, yet they really want to tackle this, and it's a huge part of their life. And that's a realization for us going forward as well.
That's really interesting. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about what kind of people are coming forward, to Fella, and kind of how you're working with that kind of target audience and how you're connecting with them, because that seems to be a big part of what it's about. Is that right?
For sure. And I think the most important thing to say is we're only working with guys at the moment, and that's only because we feel they're the kind of most underserved audience, and we can probably make the most immediate impact there. And we want to move to women and to everyone as soon as possible. But what's fascinating about the guys that we do work with is there's such a diversity of their backgrounds, of their ages, of their countries. So we're in 11 countries by default. And I think we're maybe at some point going to speak later in the podcast about how healthcare is changing with digitization, and the dislocation between the delivery of healthcare and delivery of wellness services and location and geography is a huge thing that we've instantly seen. We're kind of an internet native company as opposed to a London native company or anything like that. And in terms of, I guess, how we're reaching these people and how we're speaking them, the largest part is just me sharing my story openly on my networks, and then on the communities, the online communities like Reddit and Facebook groups that I've always been part of. And I think because there's such a dearth of guys speaking about their struggles, but even though there's so many guys out there, there's almost a disproportionate boosting of that message because it resonates with so many people.
I see. Something that I'm keen to understand a bit more as a doctor is that is something like Fella something that is going to help people, and is there a kind of evidence base to that, and like is there something that we can measure about it? And I know it's early days yet, so but I'm kind of interested in what's your thinking about that, and how are you thinking about measuring the impact that this is having?
100%. So I guess the first thing to say is all the content, we work very closely with clinical psychologists to make sure the content is the best it can be based on the resources, the CBT resources out there. So we're not doing anything new from that side. I guess the second thing to emphasize is that we're not delivering healthcare. We're building a product which helps guys self-manage and self-help through a CBT course. So the equivalent of a PDF or a self-help book, but using software and community to make them more engaging. The third thing I think would be to emphasize that we do want to go into a place where we're really measuring robust outcomes, which will be part of an evidence base, which would add to the literature and then will allow us to integrate with healthcare systems. So we're putting the measures in place in order to start to collect that information, but it is early days and we won't get there for a few more years.
It's you seem to be kind of the idea is that you're kind of occupying a space that's kind of pre-medical services. It's about trying to help people before they're in such need that they're needing mental support services from the NHS. Is that kind of how you're conceptualizing it as well?
Yeah, I think the NHS does well in general, both in physical and mental well-being, is the illness side. So the kind of extreme side, if you're really ill physically or mentally, the NHS does a really solid job. As we probably all know, because of rationing, what the NHS can do less well is the wellness side, both on physical and mental. And so hence why with the physical side, you'd often see a private physio if you can afford it, or you'd go to a gym and the gym membership you'd pay for yourself. That's almost the kind of stage that we're thinking about from the mental side at the moment, where you wouldn't be seeing a psychiatrist. You are safe in yourself. You won't be doing yourself any harm, but you are deeply struggling with a thing that's dominating your life, where there are sadly no real healthcare avenues for you to take.
Mm-hmm. I can relate to that myself, because I think if I was in the position that you were, I don't think I would kind of want to go to my GP about that. I think I would be much more want to speak to other men who, were, or other people who were going through the same sort of things that I was. Um, is that kind of community aspect and the kind of the breaking down the stigma aspect of it? What kind of value is that giving the people that you're working with? What are they saying about it?
Yeah, absolutely. And it just cut out there for a second, Zach, but I think the question was kind of what's the key value that the fellas are saying is adding for them. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I'd say there's either there's a couple of points. The probably the principal point for most guys is they have never spoken to anyone about this. So no other person they've spoken to in the detail that they speak to myself and the rest of the community. So the first point is this level of self acceptance, which is to say there's someone else out there that says the same things that I say, that says it in the same words that I say it in, and does the same things. And that there's almost a magical moment when you see someone else doing the same thing that you do and has dominated your life and you've never spoken to anyone about. And that peer-to-peer interaction is a really important aspect for keeping you coming back, because as we probably know in the in healthcare delivery, efficacy is kind of determined by adherence, and adherence to a CBT program is really difficult. And so that's almost what the community is for from a healthcare point of view, is to get to try and make sure that people stay with it through the difficult times. And I guess the second thing is there are rarely, but there are a couple of other support communities online. So Reddit, there are a couple of interesting subreddits out there, and there's something called Overeaters Anonymous, which is like Alcoholics Anonymous, but for overeating, but for binge eating. The I guess the issue that a lot of secular people or a lot of kind of more evidence based people find with that is it's good for support, but it's not very good for efficacy or science-based reasoning or any. It doesn't touch on cognitive behavioral therapy. And so I guess that mix of community, but also the really solid science-based, evidence-based cognitive behavioral therapy delivered is the mix that we're going for.
I think that's kind of wise because any sort of mental health issue to my mind is like a multifactorial problem, right? If you have binge
Mm-hmm.
eating disorder, it's not just about food, right? It's about other things
Yeah.
in your life that you're needing support with. So even if it's not, even if you're not the kind of person who um you know cares about the strict scientific rigor of a evidence base, you might still want to talk to somebody and actually try and feel better about some of the things in your life. you know
Absolutely.
so
And I guess
I want to.
you mentioned the kind of the cross conditions, the comorbidities. That's what we see time and time again as well. So there are loads of the comorbidities that pop up. General anxiety, but also more specific ones like ADHD and OCD are quite common conditions, sadly, amongst the men. So there's a lot of bonding around those specifically as well.
Mhm. Yeah, it's interesting to talk to you about this because even as a doctor, because you've kind of done some of this work for a number of months to a year on this, you probably know just about as much as most junior doctors that are coming out, if not more so. So I was wondering, I wanted to ask that about why, I know this is a kind of initial target audience of focusing on men, and that the plan is to kind of um, branch out into other demographics later. But is focusing on the gender aspect of this useful for this audience? That's what I'm kind of really interested in.
Yeah, fantastic to ask, and I definitely like to be asked on this because it's an important point, and I want to make sure the motivations we have are very clear, because I think they're very good motivations, but I would never want them to be misunderstood, really. So, because there is such shame associated with uh, an, a disordered eating or eating disorder for men, because as society knows, only women have eating disorders, which is kind of deeply embedded in our brains, and we kind of know not to be true on the surface, but it's kind of quite difficult to let loose, to be free of that notion. And so, um, because of that, a lot of the guys have never spoken to anyone. And because of that, they feel really bonded to other men who are going through these same kind of struggles, whether they, sadly, a lot of the guys will have opened up to a girlfriend or a wife or, a good friend, and sadly been told to, it's okay, just get on with it kind of thing. And so there's a real bonding around that. And so I think this kind of community aspect is really strong when you have this shared identity. And sadly, there's this shared identity through feeling uncomfortable, that a lot of the guys face. And I guess the second thing to emphasize is that I think Fella has a really important mission, to support the feminist movement. And why I say that is because a lot of what holds back equality across society is this concept that men need to be detached from their emotions. They need to be independent, and therefore their own island, and they need to just crack on with it, and they just need to get going and have a stiff upper lip. And we kind of know this, and this has been we've been tackling this now for maybe a decade, and we're getting used to this, but it's still so deeply embedded. And even though I say all these things now, I actually on a daily basis notice in myself some of that deep-seated, masculine thoughts, or I say masculinity thoughts, which are like, I shouldn't reach out for help, or I just need to work harder, and stuff like this. And I think we've got a real duty here to tackle those as a way to kind of bring up society to be more equal overall.
The way you're talking about the problem, it's almost as if, there's a kind of specific conception of masculinity which is unhelpful here. And that, when I kind of think about that, I'm kind of thinking, well, it needs to be men who are redefining that, not, a kind of, not the NHS, or kind of not other, not politicians, or not other sections of society.
Mm.
Do you think that that's part of what's going on in these community groups? Are people finding a different kind of masculinity which can accommodate the fact that, yes, we have problems, yes, society doesn't want us to talk about them, but yes, we need to, in order to, feel better about ourselves? Or am I over interpreting?
No, that's for sure happening. I think, because it is a group of only guys who have had that maybe like shared socialization. Quite often, it is just an open platform for an openness of feeling, and saying your lived experience that really doesn't exist. I've never been part of a group of men or a group of anyone that's ever done that, and so it almost no one kind of really talks about the masculine side because it's actually more about the sharing. But what is radical, I think, about this is that simply would not have existed, or would not have been possible maybe 10 years previously, because of how acceptable it would have been to speak in these terms. So I think there's definitely these subtle changes being made. And I think that's maybe the most important thing to say, is that it's more like a chipping away of these deep-seated thoughts, as inspired by cognitive behavioral therapy. It's not an overnight switch. It does take this kind of slow chipping away.
Mm-hmm. Just to stay on this kind of point about kind of the barriers that men are facing, in order to kind of to help themselves, and manage some of these issues. I wonder, do you see this connected to kind of other things that are going on in society? So, the things that come to my mind are the rise in male suicide, and also how kind of coronavirus and lockdown are impacting on people's mental health generally, and mental well-being. Have you kind of seen any impact of those things through your work?
Yeah, so I guess there's the 2 points there. And the first side is around male mental health in general. And of course, this is like a critical part of the kind of momentum that's been building up around anxiety and depression for at least 5 years now. And I think that's probably the openness around some very famous people and the openness of society to kind of speak about this has enabled a conversation around binge eating, which which relies on some of the similar openness, but simply wouldn't have been possible without that first work around anxiety and depression. So I think that's really important stuff, and we're always almost kind of capturing the wave and trying to increase the wave that is coming around that of, as you said, kind of redefining masculinity and making sure that it includes the ability to be vulnerable and actually seeing that vulnerability as a form of strength, not as a form of weakness. Then I guess the second part is around how people with disordered eating or who have struggles around eating are finding lockdown. And yeah, for sure, it's really difficult. I think that's not just for people with disordered eating, as we all know. I think there are some specific instances or there specific examples actually where it is especially difficult for people because of the food environment, because of how that they feel quite cooped up in, say, their space around the kitchen and stuff like that. But yeah, more generally, it ties into the general theme that it's a really difficult time for a lot of people. Um, One interesting point to note is that actually for some people it's an easier time because they can control their food environment more. But then I guess there's other issues that are associated with that. So yeah, it's definitely a testing time for many people.
The other thing that's kind of interesting about Fella that I can't resist asking you about is
Go for it.
this kind of um, idea that people are real. There's a demand for a kind of service that the NHS is kind of either unable to provide or not providing, or doesn't have the resources to provide. Do you think that that there could be a way of expanding Fella, um, or that it's part of a growing trend to kind of people supporting themselves, self-managing their conditions? Do you think that that's going to be a bigger thing as we move into the
Mhm.
next decade?
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting themes, I guess, going on, especially from a British viewpoint around a traditionally centralized healthcare system, traditionally publicly funded. So it's quite a few, I guess, potentially touchy topics, as well as some really interesting ones with technological trends. So I think the probably most important thing to emphasize at the beginning is that the healthcare service does a really good job at what it tries to do, and it tries to keep people alive, make sure that they're doing that in a cost efficient way, and give people a better quality of life in a rationed environment. So I think like full props to the healthcare service for what it does do. Um, Definitely important to recognize the gaps and definitely important to recognize how technology can help that. And I guess to put some of my cards on the table, I'm within the startup environment. And so I'm probably quite supportive of the ability of young, agile companies to try to be direct to consumer, try to work with individuals, um, and try to build the products that are best suited to them instead of going via a a potentially stifling central system, which could kind of dilute the ability to make exactly what people want. So yeah, I think there's a real opportunity for kind of for startups to take a space into that. And I think in terms of the self management, I think that's what we're finding technology can do, especially now we're all stay at home. We're actually recognizing that a hospital is a bundle of maybe hundreds of functions and maybe thousands even, I'm not sure. And actually, loads of those functions can be unbundled into ways that a consumer can use technology in their own home to help with that. I think some of the key difficulties is always around safety, so the regulation side, especially for some of the more serious conditions, and especially important in the US and UK healthcare systems, but healthcare systems everywhere is payment. So who pays and who decides whether that's worth it? And I think those are some really testing questions that I'm probably not an expert on.
That's okay. Don't worry. Only treating you as an expert on your own experience here. So, but and for my part, in terms of my experience, I'm a big supporter of public health care, but at the same time,
Mm-hmm.
if this is plug it, if this is identifying and addressing a need for patients, then I think that's a great thing. I mean, have you had any feedback from people who are on the clinical side of things? I would have thought that would be quite positive feedback. Is that what your experience has been?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So I guess there's a few different sides to that. So one is the actual clinical professionals we work with. So advised by a couple of GPs, and then work very closely with the clinical psychologist who designs our stuff. And then uh, what something surprising that's happened has been both referrals by therapists who we haven't even spoken with, but who have heard of Fella themselves, and then they've referred their client for the community aspect or for the extra kind of content, which has been really surprising. And then also quite a few of our fellows have spoken to their GP about it, and their GP has given a full thumbs up to that. So I think it's probably highlighting actually that this is an unfilled need right now, and we're not trying to replace any of the important medical services. We're trying to very much get to a part that wouldn't be done by the healthcare system, sadly.
Yeah. Well, I think it sounds like absolutely great work that you're doing, to be honest. And are you UK wide? Can anyone get in touch with Fella if they want to?
Yeah, we're actually global. So if you're listening to this in South America, North Africa, or Stoke, you can join Fella. So yeah, we have men from 11 countries, mostly US and UK, but we're very welcoming to anyone who wants to join us. So yeah, joinfella.com or Fella binge eating into Google, you'll be able to find us.
And one question that I always end on is whether there's a kind of book that about the topics that we've discussed that you think would be helpful for people to go and read if they want to find out more.
So the OG the original self-help book for binge eating for eating disorders is by Dr. Fairbairn at Oxford. It's called Overcoming Binge Eating, and so that it tends to take somewhat of a bulimia focus and tends to take somewhat of a woman focus, but it's really not a bad starting point. And we base a lot of the content on that. And we've had a conversation with Dr. Fairbairn. He's very much supportive. So yeah, Overcoming Binge Eating would be the most evidence-backed one that we really support. There's a few others as well, but that's the main one.
Okay, well, thanks for talking to me, Richie.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Zach.
Yeah, no worries. Okay, so I mean, is there anything else that you want to ask me, or about any comments about how the conversation went?
Basically, all good from my side. Do you think there was anything missing that you'd like to sneak in?
I'm just trying to think. Yeah, I mean, I think it's good as it is, to be honest. We talked a little bit about your personal story at the start. I don't know if I came across like a bit too blunt. I kind of, I'm not sure I did a good job of helping you relax into the conversation to start with. But then I think we got into it, and then I think it was fine. So, I mean, is that how you experienced it as well?
Yeah, I was all good from my side. If you want to do any re-recording or kind of doing another intro, very much happy to. Whatever you think, but you're all good either from my side.
Yeah. So what I'll normally do is I'll re-record the intro, but kind of with the backing music. So the kind of intro there is just to sort of help lead in and set things up. So don't worry about that. But I just kind of wanted to ask about how are you doing?
Nice.
Generally, because it's been a while since we've seen each other, right?
Definitely. I reckon. Are you still recording for this?
Yeah, I'm still recording. Yeah.
Awesome. Because there can often be quite some good stuff in this as well, and the more casual stuff. So I don't want to miss that. Yeah, really good one. Guess quick summary from my side would be from the binge eating side. Got kind of about 2 years ago, got CBT, and then really solid since then. Probably actually, so we started Fella about 4 or 5 months ago now, and that's actually been quite humbling for me to actually think, there's quite a few of the underlying thought processes especially around body image, that are still underlying, even though the actual behavior, the binge eating, is distant now. And so that's been really a nice nudge for me to kind of tuck back into some of the CBT and and actually have quite fully formed thoughts around how CBT is more widely useful for working professionals in general, and how we're kind of missing a big piece of our education almost at the moment. But and that's I kind of go to the mental gym as often as I can, and that's part of it really.
Yeah, tell us a little
And yeah,
bit about
overall, go on.
your morning routine, because I've heard about this mental gym.
Yeah, I've actually sadly been slacking this last week, but that's okay as well. The crux of it really is that I used to go to the gym every day, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening, but very routine. And that was to do something physical to improve my physical body. And I, before Fella, had never thought about this in like a mental way. And then since we're delivering CBT, it started to dawn on me just as knowledge workers, which kind of the vast majority of our network and probably most of your listeners are now doctors, very much included in that. Then how little we think about our thought processes or the level higher, our cognitions. And I'm not so meditation and breathing exercises and being kind on yourself and support networks have been in the limelight the last 5 years, and they're all good patches. But I'm also talking about something deeper, and I'm saying, well, we all have these distortions which fundamentally affect what we do, what we think, and like how effective we are at what we're trying to achieve. And actually, the vast majority of us just accept those as given, unless we are somewhat ill, mentally ill, or we have a mental condition, and then we do these exercises, and then as soon as we're no longer doing that behavior again, we stop doing those exercises. And it's so I guess the mental gym is about, well, actually seeing this as if you broke your leg, you'd not you, to try to walk again, you'd obviously do your physio, which is an important part, and you'd also then go back to the gym and maybe do your training, or you'd maybe get a personal trainer or something like that. And it's to say, actually, all of us can do way more of this kind of mental training at the cognition level.
Yeah, you're not just going to stop your physio as soon as you can walk with the
Yeah,
broken leg.
exactly. We probably want more from that, and I think that's definitely the case for knowledge workers like us as well.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of kind of managing this sort of day to day, the mental gym is one part of that, but you're kind of working quite a stressful job, aren't you? And in terms of like being, in charge of Fela, you know. So the reason I'm interested in that is because, one, I've never set up a company before, and I imagine that would really stress me out, and that it would be a lot to juggle, and kind of two, like trying to cope with managing the thinking aspect of this as well at the same time as doing that. I just don't know, like, how do you do it?
Yeah. Well, this is an important thing to emphasize that we all look at other people and we all think like, shit, how do you do that? And no one doesn't suffer. From what I can see from some very impressive friends I have, they all suffer with some forms of imposter syndrome as well. So, like, I think everyone thinks everyone else has it more together than actually is the case for everyone. I guess the uh, uh, it's interesting because I'm probably not the expert at this, because obviously my coping mechanisms in the past with stress have been quite flawed, but obviously I've thought a lot about it since then. So um, I definitely have tried to introduce daily habits which keep me on track. Meditation, sleeping well. We all know that all that good stuff, right? Eating well now. I think an important part for my continuing journey, which I still probably struggle with a little bit, is not getting guilty around procrastination, or actually seeing the cause of not getting stuff done. And it's actually remarkably similar to binge eating. And so I think I'm going through a whole process of my working style myself to see if I can try and mature my relationship with work and still get, the things I want done, and still, produce what the world needs, but also do it in a way where I'm quite calm and where I can be happy when I'm doing that as well. So I'm still going through some of the kind of working juggles myself, but I think probably the recognition that I it's almost like in the physical side, if someone can like do a handstand and I can't do a handstand, I wouldn't just go, I can like kick up into one and I can hold it like a gymnast, right? But for this weird reason with our mental state, we think of whoever you really admire from the mental side, and you hold them up and you go, like, why can't I just be like them? And it's like, well, of course you can't. You need to like gradually train yourself to get there. We don't have that humility. And so probably the biggest change for me has been this humility.
I'm just trying to think who my mental idol is. There's Judge Dredd. That probably doesn't count, does it?
Yeah, amazing.
I was watching the film last night, so that's my excuse.
Completely legit mental
idol. So, I mean, what's next for you in terms of take it you're going to be working on Fella for the next wee while? Is that the only project that you've got going, or
no? This is very much full time. In terms of the company side, we'll be raising some external funding in about 3 months' time, mainly from US investors, and basically trying to get to 1 million people in the next 5 years is the key. So trying to build out efficacy for the short term and then also scale for the long term, and making sure that what works now also works later.
Yeah. I honestly think it's fantastic what you're doing, and I think the proof of that's in the response that you've got. I mean, you're clearly offering something that people want to have. So yeah, I think that's great.
Same question to you. How's everything at your
end? So I've just done the first 2 years of my training, and that was tough, but I really enjoyed it because you're a ward monkey. You're seeing a lot of this stuff. You're enacting other people's plans, but you don't actually have any real power to change anything that you're seeing or making it better. You're just there to carry out what other people want you to do, which is fine. And some of the patients that I've met in the last 2 years, I mean, just amazing stories. But so I'm kind of in a gap in my training now. So I'm doing a research job at the Anne Rowling Clinic. So J.K. Rowling gave a lot of money to the University of Edinburgh to study multiple sclerosis and motor neuron disease. So I'm kind of helping out with some of the clinical trials there and trying to get involved in some academic stuff as well. But academic stuff is hard, and it's not hard because of the actual content. It's hard because of what's up here, managing your own psychology. It's I'm finding that really tough, because there's no like instant payoffs, right? It's all delayed gratification. And research is a very, very long road. So I'm kind of thinking, is that something that I want to do? And that's where the idea for the podcast and the YouTube channel came in, because I've always been interested in kind of wider society as well, and didn't want to wait until I'm 50 to be able to do something about that.
Well, as you can imagine, Zach, it has my full support, and I can definitely imagine the academia side is really testing.
Yeah, as a, like because you weren't ever drawn to academia, were like in terms of being an economics professor, or were you?
The sad thing, Zach, is probably just not very good at it, or not good enough at it. But no, probably I got my first taste of kind of technology and startups when I was about 20 in my second year, and that just really changed my worldview. And I was like, why have I not been exposed to this earlier, really? And I kind of became enamored, and probably have not lost my love for it since. So as you can probably see, that's what I'm pretty obsessed with.
Yeah, well, what is it about it that makes you feel that way?
I think I used all these technologies in the past. Like, I grew up with a computer, right? But I always used it. I never thought about it. Like, I always used Facebook, but I never thought that like someone had made it and someone had designed it and someone was like shaping my life because of it. And it was that realization that with technology, you have this like hugely powerful lever to change and to ideally benefit, to shape society in a very positive way, that sadly, our human capacity is quite limited to do on an individual basis. And I hadn't fully appreciated almost the slightly philosophical effects of that in just like how powerful that lever can be. A small group anywhere in the world can impact big change everywhere. And so that probably was like, like should I be doing that? And what I sadly maybe think a lot of society is held back by gatekeepers, and gatekeepers saying, "Oh, you can't do that. You have to wait 30 years to do that, or you have to have that credential." And what I really like about technology is that often is very much more democratized. So people anywhere can produce really impressive things, which can be useful for anywhere else in the world. I think that's a really remarkable kind of global phenomenon that we maybe even yet haven't like fully appreciated in wider society. So yeah, quite passionate about that, I think.
Yeah, I definitely think we need more people that have that attitude towards technology in the NHS. Because I don't know if you've had to work with any NHS systems, probably not, but the IT is just unbelievable.
Yeah,
Not actually joking. So this is 100% true. When I started my first job on a respiratory ward in an unnamed uh, hospital, um, you had to wait for 10 minutes for the computers to boot up
yeah,
in the morning. So we'd
yeah,
all come in 10 minutes early and turn all the computers on before the morning meeting so that they'd be ready for the ward
yeah.
round when we'd finished. And there's a whole host of stuff like that people are just kind of
I
making,
guess
like, yeah.
the best thing is you probably get out your phone, you probably flick on WhatsApp or Instagram or BBC News app, right? And you're like, you don't even think about that dichotomy.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. One of the consultants said to me, I'm going to take a stopwatch on our next ward round and just audit how long we waiting for the X-rays to load up on the computer.
Yeah, absolutely.
um, yeah, so it's I mean, I don't think it can stay that way. It's something that's going to have to change, but you know, it's just a question of time. And I think if you're an entrepreneur or you're politician, you're much more able to influence that than you are as someone who's actually working in
Yeah.
that system.
I guess interestingly, so both my parents were GPs. Only one is now still a GP, and my sister and brother-in-law are both just graduated doctors. And so, uh, yeah, they tell me all the stories. So I guess I know about the system without being in the system, really.
Yeah, okay, no, I think that's the best way, isn't it?
It's a regular message from people on the inside, but it's a really difficult thing for such an institution like the NHS to change. It's
I
very
mean,
difficult.
we all love it to bits. It's just you just wish it was better,
Yeah,
and you wish you could do more for people. But it's the only system we've got, and that's so every day people are I think the people are absolutely unbelievable who work in
yeah,
the system. So yeah, that's all I can say about that, really.
definitely.